But let's talk a little bit more about Coup, because I had read that you had first had this idea a little over a decade ago.
Mm-hmm.
What, if you don't mind, go ahead and share that story with us.
Sure. I was walking down a street in Jersey City, which is where I was living at the time and where I spent my teenage years and also lived during my early 20s. And at that time, Jersey City was in a really great state of flux with a lot of buildings coming down and new construction going up. There had been a lot of rezoning of these industrial areas that were right up against the Hudson River. The other side of the river is Manhattan, lower Manhattan. And I spent a lot of time walking around in these areas that were changing quickly, and I saw this old factory with empty windows, and I was looking up, and this gigantic flock of pigeons took off from the top, and I just had this sudden image of a girl or a child, actually originally for about a day, who was a boy, and then I changed it over to a girl. I just had this image of a child up there with the pigeons, and I was wondering what it would be like for them to live with a flock of pigeons. And I went home and I started drafting, and I wrote the first chapter, and then it took a very long time to finish the book, and then I did many other drafts before I got my agent. And it
How
went.
long are we talking from idea to rough draft then?
Idea to rough draft was actually close to 5 years, because I was about 19 when I got the idea, and I was in school, and I found it really hard to finish a first draft. I was working on other things. I also thought at the time, maybe I want to write literary fiction. I was reading. I think when you're in your late teens and early 20s, there's a lot of time where you're figuring out your identity, and sometimes you get ideas that you should be doing this or should be doing that. And for me, I think, although I had wanted to write children's books since I was a child, and that was always like a kind of unwavering core in me, there were years where I questioned that. And so I would put Coup down to try to work on short stories. I was really lucky while I was at NYU. I was able to take some really excellent creative writing classes, including I took a really formative one with the editor and writer Ed Park. And then later on I took a class with Zadie Smith, who is extraordinary. And both of those experiences led me to think, maybe I should be writing for adults, or maybe I should be writing essays, like literary essays, and maybe I should focus on trying to do that. And I would do those things.
You published Coup, that could never happen, right?
No, it's not. It's not. It was also I was when I was in college, I had to work. Like, I lived at home, but I also had to work, so I didn't have a lot of time. And I always had a job. So I always was I was a nanny, I worked at a vintage clothing store, I worked in a preschool as their art teacher for a long time. And I usually had 2 jobs, and I was also going to school, and I was commuting to and from school. So I was on the PATH train all the time. And those years, I was just literally running all over New York and Jersey City, going from class to my jobs to try to do my reading and my homework. And then I was also trying to write. And I remember feeling a lot of pressure to use my time in a very economical way. And I think that pressure slowed me down in terms of finishing Coup and figuring out how I wanted to be a writer. I probably spent too long trying to figure that out. But ultimately I did finish Coup, and then I think I did 2 more drafts of it before I even sent it out to agents. And I started sending it out to agents maybe around 2013 for the first time. And I got my agent through your website, Katie Grimm, because I read an interview you did with her, and I really liked what she said. And so I queried her, and she wrote back, and she said, I'm really interested. And we talked back and forth a few more times. I revised, and I resubmitted to her, I think, before she actually signed me. And then I did more revisions with her before we actually went on sub. And again, it took me a while because I had a lot of other things in life come up. Like I had a really difficult pregnancy with my daughter, and we moved a few times, and I was working full time. So, Coup had a long journey. I also wrote big chunks of 2 other novels at the same time over the years that I was working on Coup, both of which I've put in a drawer. So I was
middle grade, or was there a literary one in there?
There was a literary one in there that I am very happy. I think I got a lot out of trying to make it work, but ultimately it's not a genre that I enjoy spending a lot of time in, including as a reader. I don't really read literary fiction anymore for adults now that I'm not in college. I do sometimes, but not like I read middle grade, and I read a lot of adult nonfiction. And I still try to read classics and older books, rather than literary fiction that's being published right now. I feel like I'm just not as interested in that as a genre at the moment. And the other book that I wrote probably like 200 pages of, but had a lot of issues with plot, was another middle grade book. But both of those were kind of like training exercises. And Coup never felt like a training exercise. I always knew that I would finish it, and I always had a gut feeling that it would be published.
You were right. Trust your gut.
It's like a good lesson in figuring out which project feels like that, because I always had that feeling with Coup from the beginning, whereas I didn't have it with these other projects that ultimately didn't work out.
Quick point of clarification.
Sure.
Although middlegradeninja.com is undoubtedly the finest resource available to writers today, and everyone listening should go and check it out.
Yes.
Middle Grade Ninja didn't find you an agent. Your hard work, your dedication, and your excellent manuscript found you an agent.
But I found her through, I remember I read her interview on your site, and I felt like that is, like, I just had this feeling, oh yeah, I could connect with this person. And when I queried her, I really did. She's immensely helpful. I mean, Katie's editorial vision and ideas for Coup, going back to when she first saw it, helped it become published. She gave it so much of her time and her expertise before we ever went on submission. And she never made me feel rushed, which was extraordinary too.
Do you remember how many times you went back and forth with Miss Grimm?
Oh my gosh. I didn't keep track a lot. And I rewrote the ending a few times with Katie.
And what was it? And Katie Graham, if you're listening, we'll find you another author almost as good as Kaela Noel. Come on the show. I would love to talk with you. That will be a wonderful conversation.
Yes.
What was it about Katie Graham, as you were evaluating agents, that made you feel that, yes, this is the person you should be pursuing? This is someone you can trust with your baby before you had your baby. I feel like she could be an editor herself, which a lot of agents probably could also be editors, but she really has that editorial sensibility and patience. And I just felt like I was in good hands. And Virginia is also an extraordinary editor, and it was like this perfect pairing where Katie helped me really get it into shape, and then Virginia also finessed it and drew out more. But Katie, I think, more so than many agents, she really had the patience to work through drafts until we got it as close to perfection as we could. And I never felt pressured to go on submission before it was really felt right. You remember ballpark how long you went back and forth from the time she signed you to submission?
It was about 2 years, if I'm remembering correctly. And that was also because in the middle, I had trouble, with my daughter, I had a lot of pregnancy complications. So I couldn't really write during a chunk of that time. I mean, I tried, but I was having a lot of trouble focusing. So we took a break, and then the following year, I ended up deciding to change the ending somewhat significantly. Not the very ending, but there were some characters that I cut,
And that all took time. And happily, I'm working on my second book now, and I finished that draft already, so I'm speeding up.
And do you have that same gut feeling that, yes, this is absolutely the next one?
Yeah, I think so.